So, welcome back to the next Start Some Good Fireside Chat. Thank you for those who've joined us live. Thank you to those who are watching afterwards from the original RSVP group or from one of our many programs, dipping into our resource library and tapping into the knowledge that these events are designed to bring you. Today is a really interesting topic that I think is on a lot of people's minds, which is how AI unlocks opportunities for business, but also crucially for those of us in the Start Some Good community for impact. And I'm thrilled to be joined today by Odeta Iseviciute joining us from Lithuania, where she's the co-founder or the founder of ChangeAI. And she's a strategic innovator with 15 years plus of experience turning complex challenges into practical tech-enabled solutions across industries from fintech and e-commerce to AI infrastructure. I met Odeta at an event in Hyderabad, India, of all places, earlier this year. And I thought she gave one of the kind of best practical overviews of kind of what was going on with AI and the opportunities that community that I was there with, who were also all social entrepreneurs, people using technology to help address and achieve the sustainable development goals. And it made me really want to bring her in for a chat, both to ask some questions that are on my mind, but invite all of you guys to learn alongside me, because I know that these are questions on lots of people's minds. Before I plunge in, though, I realize I've jumped slightly ahead because I did want to acknowledge the land that I'm hosting this call from today, which is the traditional land of the Camaragal people of the Eora Nation here on the North Shore of Sydney, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging here, as well as my respects to everyone who's on the call and the country that you're joining us from and all the traditions contained within your own story and the country that you're on. Thank you all for being here, and thank you especially, Odeta, for joining us.
Thank you, Tom, for inviting. I'm really glad we met in that Hyderabad, of all places. And it's such a nice tradition to pay the respects. So thank you very much, everyone, as well, and especially Tom for having me here. I think it's like my first type of this sort of conversation online, because I have a lot of them offline. So I'm also super excited about that.
Yes, and you use some really good slides as part of that thing. So I'm going to force you to, you're going to have to kind of paint pictures with your words to explain it to us here. But that's, that's the challenge with today's audio, I think, world. So before we get into maybe, kind of what's happening right now, I'd love for you to just give a little bit of background in terms of your story, Odeta. How did you come to be doing ChangeAI and guiding people through this time of transition and change? What's led you to this point?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I just want to check, is my internet connectivity okay? Like, am I breaking or it's all good? All good? Perfect.
No, you seem good today,
yeah. So, like I can start very far away, 15 years ago, or I can start very recent, a couple of years ago. So I'll better take a kind of like this middle ground. But for the last now 11 years, I've been a startup founder and what I call refounder. That's also what got me to win a WSA award, World Summit Award, where Tom, we met 9 years after I have won, actually, and just do a lot of different things. I've run education platform, I run loyalty platform, I helped a digital bank to transform from like a single facility in Lithuania into a fully digital bank with online KYC procedures and onboarding. And then, of all places, I think in 2023, people that I knew, the people who I worked with, invited me to join their company, and it was ChangeAI. And we've been building a very complex technology that I call, in simple terms, railroad for the AI to actually be able to get anywhere. And that is infrastructure. So my co-founders, two developers, they had that issue that if you, as a solo developer, a small company, want to play around with AI, and bear in mind that was mid-2023, so they actually had that problem at the start of 2023, the infrastructure cost, the GPUs that actually power up the AI ecosystem, the algorithms, were super expensive. And before they could get any product onto the market or like any meaningful MVP of the product, they had already reaped up AWS, bills that were not justifying, like even the business model would not have like been enough to cover the initial cost of testing and playing around with AI. So they kind of like started this company to invite regular people who have like vacant or available GPUs, for example, gaming consoles or powerful PCs or special GPUs for certain things, to connect into a network so that that resource can be utilized by other developers and by other companies as an alternative to AWS, Google Cloud, Microsoft, and the others. We as users of AI, especially maybe free users or paying 20 euros for, or dollars for an account and having access to AI, we don't understand the cost that developers face, because the second you want to integrate AI into something as a developer through APIs into your app or somewhere, you will start paying really hefty costs for processing the I can compute the answers and provide whatever your service you want to provide. Now is going down drastically. Google is pioneering that space. They're giving a lot of free credit for developers and things like that. But that was back in the day. So what it gave me is the ability to really understand AI from a technical standpoint. So what, all of these infrastructure model nuances, because not all models need super expensive enterprise grade NVIDIA GPUs. Some of them can run even on our phones. So while I was looking for our customers and doing our business development, I had to meet a lot of different companies, encounter a lot of different, types of solutions that are required by my developers and sit down with them until I understand in human language what is it, how does AI work, how would it solve that problem, and how, all the technical nuances. Simply because I have that, I guess, technical mindset as well from all the startups that I've done in my past. And fast forward a year and a half, at the start of this year, I realized that actually, and doing all of the business development, I realized that before companies can use infrastructure, they need to understand what to do with AI. And that was kind of like my reason for starting ChangeAI, really to help SMEs, business owners, to understand how to meaningfully, effectively, and ROI positive ways to use AI within their companies. So I'm combining that knowledge that I acquired during the time at the startup, but also all the kind of previous knowledge of business operations and problem solving within the companies to actually teach people how to solve their own problems with AI, essentially.
And
so that's not the short, neither too long answer.
Sorry. That was perfect length. I mean, we've got a decent amount of time to explore this stuff, which is what I like about, I think, this format and medium. And shout out to those who've joined us live. The kind of privilege, for want of a better word, you get in joining us is the chance to ask your own questions later on. But my privilege in being the host is I get to go first. But I'm interested in, I guess through those early experiences, I'm almost thinking about I was the first non-co-founder employee for a online community for dance music enthusiasts in Australia back in the late 90s, which turned into Junkie Media, for anyone listening in Australia, kind of a major media company for a while. And I just remember kind of the combination of enthusiasm and ignorance that I was trying to navigate at the time for people who, had heard about this newfangled thing and, wanted to promote their event or whatever, but also had no idea how banner ads worked even back then, and would call me up and be like, I'm on your website and my ad's not there. And I'd say, hit refresh. What about now? I imagine that's somewhat similar to what you're, that kind of intersection point of people are curious, maybe even fearful, but desiring to know more. But also kind of not, starting from a low base in some cases. What are some of the kind of common misunderstandings, I guess, that you think get in the way of people who are coming into this space or trying to figure out how to make it work for them and their goals?
Yeah. So I think in general, well, there are so many different layers, right? If we look at media and the misconceptions that media is promoting, that's one thing, and kind of like one source of maybe misconceptions. Regulators, especially here in Europe, we have an EU Act as a first thing before we have proper AI companies here in Europe. So that's kind of like also adding a layer of at least misconceptions here. And not, misconceptions for me, they arise from lack of understanding and knowledge. That's the only thing, right? And then the third element is, as you rightly pointed, the companies that I work with, the communities that I meet during events and things like that, like the level of understanding and knowledge is really, really diverse. Like there is a huge spectrum of, like somebody might be like, oh, I use ChatGPT a couple of times a week to talk about recipes, but I would never use it for work, or like I never figured using it for work. To like a real estate company owner who wants to automate like all of his processes and has already gone quite a bit in terms of conceptualizing all of it and how would it work. So actually really digging deep, wants a digital twin and things like that to streamline his operations. So that spectrum is great. But I think that, like I always advise, I'm not answering your question yet, but like I always say, educate yourself. Like this technology, imagine if it's internet right now, like internet is being invented right now. Just educate yourself, and then there will be no misconceptions. But so I think the kind of like the biggest misconception is obviously we use ChatGPT for free as majority of the users, and we don't know how to prompt. So our experience with AI becomes really vague, not structured, and not optimal. And then a lot of people don't even want to think about it. Like, okay, so how do I go deeper? Because it actually doesn't work already, right? So, should I even like try to get it to work? And like, it will waste my time and things like that. I also meet randomly people and company owners, even like SEO or web development companies, who are too kind of like, I don't know, proud of their old skills, and they kind of ignore, like, like try to deny this revolution that AI will now be part of every infrastructure, of every solution, of every process. Not maybe now, but like in a year, in 2 years, as it evolves and as it integrates into the tools that we use, into our lives, into the companies, and it will be, kind of like subtle integration. So that kind of like not going there to educate yourself, that's probably the biggest hurdle of people. And then, there's all this fear, like it will see, who knows how it will be used. Then we hear that US and Europe are now investing billions of dollars into infrastructure, but as free users, we don't understand the cost at all of like AI when it's actually integrated and then it's powering the engine of our own companies. So there is just like lack of understanding. And, AI is three parts. It's data, it's models, and it's infrastructure. Take one away, you don't have AI. It's equally important to have all these three parts. And it's equally important to know, not necessarily like super deep down, but to understand those three parts and what role do they play and how do they affect my work and my business. And then just learn and educate. Use tools all the time. YouTube is the best source of all this, of all the kind of like education material. Yeah.
I'm interested in the inverse of that as well, I guess. It's interesting to hear you say, and I think that's probably right, that it will eventually affect every business, every industry. And again, it reminds me of, kind of the early days of the consumer web, and a similar debate. Was this kind of its own industry? Like, was e-commerce going to be a separate thing from commerce, or would it eventually, of course, even bricks and mortar stores have all their back-end systems obviously powered by SaaS products, and it has truly come to impact more or less pretty close to every business. Whereas, of course, a couple of other technology hype cycles between then and now haven't, where, their early advocates said similar things. Blockchain would change money, and, still might, but hasn't yet, forever for all of us. And the metaverse would be, yeah, exactly, but still, I'm less confident that metaverse or blockchain will get there than I am with AI. Could you just talk a little bit more, I guess, about why your confidence, I guess, that it will eventually be one of those truly transforming everything, one of those very rare transforming everything technologies, rather than one of those transforming some things technologies?
Some things.
Yeah.
Very good question. I use analogy of factories. The assembly line has automated production from 90 hours for one car assembly to 12 hours, car assembly. And then obviously, giving rise and birth of all the consumerist goods that we have around us, right? And they were run by people. First of all, they were run by people. The second that automations, robotization was at the level of being able to actually replace people, it started happening And now we have even dark factories actually operate them and assemble cars in no time without any human intervention, or like really, really minimal supervision, right? And I believe that AI will do the same for a lot of the, like when we think about the 1990s or 2000, early 2000s movies where we close people in those, like American movies, close people in those tiny boxes, put them in their computer, and they're kind of doing something. A lot of that is already gone, right? Because of automations of the processes, the way digital systems work. So for me, AI is just that assembly line automation through robotization, where people become less and less important for every piece of the puzzle or every piece of the way. And the reason for that is because I constantly work with automation building and kind of like integrating AI into companies. And it's a fact. It works. Developers kind of say that it's not 100% yet. Like we cannot launch, as a multi-million-dollar company or, AI customer support agent if we're an electricity, let's say, provider. We can't really launch AI customer support and kind of, sleep very well without the fear that it will kind of, still hallucinate or sell somebody a lifetime plan for $1 or, like after some complaints. So AI does not work 100% yet. It's less than 3 years old. Generative AI is less than 3 years old. Actually, November 22nd, 2022 was the birth of ChatGPT, launching the generative AI tool to the public. Why did they do it? What are they learning and updating? I mean, so much progress has happened in those less than 3 years. And we're already debating about like, will it replace work and will it replace digital systems? Then it's only 3 years old. Usually it takes, let's say, internet or combustion engine or electricity. It takes between 30 to 70 years for that fundamental technology and infrastructure to actually reap the full impact and to show the full impact of the solutions built on top of that infrastructure. So, like from electricity, okay, the first washing machine was launched maybe in like 30, 40 years, but to the point, and our offices are full of electronic gadgets powered by electricity, it took like over 100 years. So AI is much faster. It's already used by, billion people around the world at least, and it's less than 3 years old. We cannot compare it with any other technology that came before. It has already impacted greatly a lot of, content obviously related jobs, but also content analysis jobs. Like I hear about medicine invented by AI. I hear about materials that are tougher than steel, but softer than foam being invented with the help of AI. So, of course, something can happen. We can like get, internet might be switched off and then the AI dies or something. But the signs of the impact of AI are absolutely huge, really, already in less than 3 years. That's the reason why I really do believe that that's the fundamental technology that actually shifts the world as we know it. And not only tech, but really all the world as we know it as human beings.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of, particularly on the social change side of things, I think sometimes the debate or the discussion is very caught up in the kind of meta impacts, and they're really important to talk about, like the level of power use and so on. But I also think that it's a little bit how I feel about flying. We met in Hyderabad, and I think that was a valuable thing to do, and to be there with those other change makers and to spend that time. And that's something I really believe in now. Flying has a really negative impact on climate and environment, but I don't think we can solve that challenge if those of us who care about it all just stay where we are and only let the petrostates and the carbon lobbyists get together, meet people in person, with all the benefits that comes from that. And that's a little bit how I feel about AI as well. Like putting, I think there's in some ways a separate conversation we had about how we decarbonize electricity and things like that. But I think, it's clearly a powerful tool. It's clearly making, reshaping industries. It's making some companies more competitive. It's solving problems. It's inventing new things. And so like any tool, I think it's kind of on those of us who care about the positive outcomes to figure out how to use it for those positive outcomes rather than, I think there can be a tendency, and sometimes admirable, I admire those people, but to kind of, be holier than thou or purist around some of these things. I mean, how do you think about some, I guess, those trade? I mean, that I guess is a story I tell myself as someone who like is very involved in
Yes.
network building and, kind of building alliances and collaborations for social impact, and just can't imagine how I know for a
Yeah.
fact it doesn't move in the same way when I can't meet people in person and so on. So that's certainly kind of how how I've come to
Yeah.
think about these things. How do you think about those sorts of trade-offs? And I'm sure you get a lot of pushback on this. So I guess how do you kind of talk to other people about it as well when they bring these things up, as I know they must?
So actually, like a week ago, I was in Turkey, in Istanbul, participating at UNIDO's Clean Tech Days, where they get like a lot of actually companies that have gone through UNIDO's accelerator. And they like from all over the world, really, again, flying, right, from Seoul to Kazakhstan to a lot of different places. But basically, they were presenting their clean tech solutions to UNIDO, and then there was a competition, right? And I was invited to do a keynote. And actually, like I touched upon this specific topic, right? So every new technology goes through the same cycle. They solve, like a technology solves a problem, and then over time, as it gets into the hands of more and more people and more users jump on the technology, there are many new problems created that require more advanced technology to solve those problems. And to me, at least, the way I analyze the world, really not only about, flying, but, think about food at the start of 19,000s, like it was done manually, right?
Mm-hmm.
Once the fertilizers, the machinery, also the green revolution between 50s and 60s, high crop yields, irrigation, things like that. Now an average American consumes 3,400 calories, which is not necessary. It causes a lot of disease, diabetes, heart problems, is already almost like an epidemic. Waste so much food, and also like, agriculture is now one of the biggest cause of biodiversity loss, of deforestation, carbon emissions, and all to produce food that is not even necessary anymore for people. But the industry, there is no company that is in agriculture right now who will say, no, let's produce less food, right? Because that will mean less money for them. Assembly line and production. Look at all the waste that we create. We have like a 20 handbag this year that, we forgot to take off even the tags of the first or the second that we bought that year. It's like the market ad marketing, and it's like it's our capitalist society. It's free market, right? That pushes us to consume and do more. And the more people jump on or like are able to use the tool, for example, cars, right? Once more middle-class families were able to purchase the cars, it started creating that problem of pollution and things like that, traffic, road deaths, and all of this, even though they saved the world from ecological catastrophe of horse manure back in, again, 1920, right? Because that was supposed to kind of like London and New York uninhabitable. I think 1.1 million kilograms of manure every day by horses. So, it solves one thing, but then it creates other bigger problems, I guess, and more global problems as the world is connected. And the same as with AI. Right now, it's one of those reasons, like the data centers, they've been around for ages. AI did not start using completely new data centers. Yes, some of them are being built, but it's not like a completely new thing. So all our cloud, all our data, everything is run on data centers, on GPUs, somewhere connected into servers, right? And they all use electricity, they all use natural resources, and they all emit heat. But there is so much innovation being done also on that front as well. We just don't necessarily dig into it. But NVIDIA became the only company in the world that is winning in AI right now because their GPUs happen to be the most kind of suitable for powering up or like being that railroad for AI to run on. But every other company in the world is R&Ding. They are moving and hardware is obviously much more difficult to make than software, but there is so much innovation being built on the GPU side to make them cheaper, to make them more effective, to make them consume less electricity. And then there is also, like take Bill Gates with all of his nuclear ideas. China is actually like investing a lot. And of course, there is a debate, is nuclear safe and how do we protect it from being not safe? But innovation is happening on all of these fronts. So of course, the more people use AI, the more electricity is required to power those GPUs. But also, like on another note, like a lot of data centers are being built in places where there is natural energy, like hydro or solar energy, because data center owners also want to make it as cost efficient for them because they are businesses, right? So all of these things kind of play at the same time, and we're still yet to see the finale, or like if there will ever be finale. And I think the biggest problem is travelers who mindlessly travel and take plane rides just to kind of, I don't know, go and eat more food that they don't need in the other country, instead of really getting to know the culture and understanding the locals and things like that. So it's all about the number of people who get access to the technology and how easily can they manipulate the technology. So once it became abundant, once planes and trips became cheap and abundant, once food became abundant, and the same with like Facebook changed the also like so many different things. Started in 2004, and like who could have imagined that 21 years later it will have affected the way we do media, quality journalism, impact to democracies, impact to elections, like impact to our psychological and well-being, impact on business model, like all of these changes that happened within that 21 years. And it's like it might start with good and then become worse, or it might start worse and it becomes good as the industry progresses.
Mark
and
Zuckerberg
moves.
want to rate the attractiveness of girls at Harvard or whatever. It's funny how things evolve. I do think the NVIDIA story is such an interesting one from a startup point of view, that the kind of, the boom behind the most valuable company in the world today was not something they anticipated. They built a product for a niche, gaming PCs, and it just so happened that those were the perfect GPUs to power AI, model creation and data crunching and so on. I just think it's so interesting kind of how often you see that in some ways, I think it's why it's another lesson, I think, for startups up there. Often, I think particularly this is more of a temptation with social impact ventures, is they aim for universal markets. And in some ways, the event we met was about technology startups and products that support the SDGs, which we really believe in. That's a key organizing principle of lend for good and start some good. And, but I do think it's an example of where sometimes we get encouraged to think about these huge universal goals, zero hunger, quality housing for everyone and so on. And those are, great like societal goals, but they're not good goals for a startup generally. And, you've got to really kind of focus in on.
Wow.
You think, I mean, not at the start, at least. I feel like the way I mean, I'm a big believer in, I mean, even if in theory your market is everyone, you've still got to really identify the early adopter sub-market within that, at least. And I think that, the danger sometimes is when you're trying to appeal to everyone, everyone's very diverse. And so there's a danger that it doesn't kind of land for it. Like, I think if, it's hard to, you never get to run these things twice. But if NVIDIA had been like, these are the, these chips are the perfect chips for this future thing you're going to want to do, people would be like, but we're not doing that right now. But instead it was just like, this is the best for your gaming rig. And so I think, again, having that kind of niche adopter group that you provide a lot of value to initially is often then where, kind of makes you ready when the world evolves. I think, again, also no one knows exactly what's going to happen, but it gives you that foundation, I think. I like that story. Just, build a great thing, and sometimes the world just flows in your direction.
Yeah. Do you want to hear two very successful social good startup stories that literally had the same path? Like,
yes, I would love to. Perfect. I was going to ask you for some specifics.
Yeah. So one of them is actually first unicorn in Lithuania, and they are called Winted. They sell, like, it's a platform to sell secondhand clothes. And for, I think, 10 or 12 years, they've been a startup running on investment, as in not profitable, really kind of not necessarily struggling, but really the only way for them to survive was to get the second round of investment, because they was founded, I can't remember exactly, but it was way before sustainability became cool. And the second the sustainability became cool and the world really started consciously thinking about, oh, fashion is such a huge polluter. Oh, Atacama Desert, all the kind of like, dump of the clothes that was made and never even bought in the first place. Oh, we need to be more conscious consumers. So that trend has actually completely changed the game for Vinted, that has been for Lithuanian market a huge startup, but for the world kind of like comparison, a tiny startup that was running on investments. And I think in the year 2018 or 19, they became profitable, and a couple of years later they became a unicorn. Simply because the world has moved to that point of like, okay, we need to use secondhand clothes because it's not sustainable, and in some cases it's also much more cost effective. The second story that I wanted to share was actually from WSA winners. I met David on a bus to a similar event just in Cascais in Portugal. We were taking that ride and we started talking, and my mind was blown off. At that point, I think they had recently raised like 10 or 12 million for David has raised that money for his social impact startup that is providing the last mile delivery service for mom and pop stores across Africa. I think it was only in Kenya back in 2018. And what he, as an entrepreneur, like educated in the US, has noticed on his Erasmus or like exchange program in Egypt is that every week that small corner store is closing for one day at a certain point in time, and it's not working. And then he started talking to those owners of the mom and pop stores. And he realized that there is no infrastructure for them to get products into their store because they have to travel the whole day to restock their company. So he came back to US and he was obsessed to solve that problem with a very simple tech, because it's a marketplace. It's like an e-commerce store, right? But just geared towards these small businesses. Fast forward, they raised 124 million, which is the biggest African raise outside of fintech a couple of years ago, maybe like in 2022. And now they are not only providing that last mile delivery service, because they realize that actually financing is a problem. So why don't we give, because they have all the data of the companies that are, restocking through them, also to see how much they sell and to estimate, and providing the payment gateways and solutions. Then they were able to provide like loans for products, which are completely different rates of borrowing money in Africa. It's like 1% instead of 120%. So they became, and also obviously they had to eventually develop their own trucking system, their own warehouses, and became also a logistics company, because that did not exist in Africa. So it's kind of like, I think for social entrepreneurs, of course, and actually it applies to all startups, also in startups for quite a while now. It's like, really, as you said, find that niche, find those early adopters, those key customers, and do it super well. Provide your service with all of those social values at mind. Like, we're solving something, we're part of something bigger, but don't expect, the bigger and like the massive scale to happen at once. It's really, I've been super, like when I entered startups in like 2015, 16, I was super kind of like, impatient. Everything has to happen now. What do you mean? Like, we need money, because obviously it's always a struggle. Like at the early days, it's always a struggle to meet the ends meet, right? Make the ends meet. That's the expression. And that scarcity mentality, acting out of that scarcity, really prevents a lot of good ideas and a lot of good founders to actually make meaningful impact over a period of time. So being strategic and understanding, how do I actually finance this in the easiest yet most effective manner from the get-go, who will be that core audience, those believers who will trust me to actually be able to have time to show the potential, but also reap the benefits of any market movements, because the world is changing faster than ever, really. I have another story from WSA winners, a very quick one, and it's about the business model, which I found super brilliant. It also touches a little bit with AI. So Be My Eyes is an app for blind or visually impaired people to be able to call a bunch of volunteers in their own country to get help for getting around, for understanding things, and to kind of like, just, for example, is this yogurt? Or is this a yogurt? Or is this a sour cream in my fridge? Or, what's the expiration date? So Hans was losing sight, and he is not a technical guy. He decided to do the startup. And from the get-go, because he went to his Danish company, and he went to Copenhagen startup pitch competitions, being already outside of a typical startup age group, also zero technical understanding. But he managed to convince 12 people to join his team to try to make it happen. And they decided, of course, that they cannot charge neither blind people nor the volunteers for participating in helping the blind and visually impaired people. So they came up with a brilliant business model where they discovered, through a lot of research and a lot of kind of like conversations, I guess, of all the 12 people, connected to a lot of different people, that Google's, Facebook's, LinkedIn's of the world have a lot of problems servicing people with disabilities, because, there is no way to differentiate when a visually impaired person is calling Facebook or LinkedIn to get help, and how do they get to that point of calling for help. So Be My Eyes is now actually integrated as the, like a channel that immediately, when it rings for Microsoft, it already knows that this person has this sort of disability. And these huge corporations are paying Be My Eyes for that service. Also, Be My Eyes is being used by, a lot of companies as this corporate social responsibility face, I would say, to kind of do good and to impact world for better. And Hans told me that the 8 million, well, I interviewed him for my podcast, Edge of Impact, where I interview a lot of WSA winners and where these stories come from. It's like we had that conversation in 2023, I think, at the end of 2023. At that point, they had 8 million users, and they spent zero money on marketing. Zero. It was all that value creation, that message that was broadcasted, and that attracted people to do good and to so easily make an impact in somebody's lives. So there are ways for social entrepreneurs really to think creatively outside of the box, to map out all the audiences that are related to my immediate audiences that I serve, but who else is benefiting? Like that wider third party, fourth party audiences, or like stakeholders that could potentially have benefit of my solution. And then be super creative, use AI, the good prompt of how to actually, get that initial injection, and how to onboard those stakeholders to be the first believers so that you have time.
That's great. I realize, time is flying by. For all I was like, hey, we got heaps of time before. All of a sudden, well, this is, I guess, how time works. Something that I will never entirely get used to. You have lots of it, and then suddenly you have
And I talk a lot, sorry.
less of it. And yeah, I'm never going to wrap my head around that. But I guess I did want to like get practical. It's been great to have these, stories and examples, because they kind of show some tangible how people are doing different things.
Yeah.
But I guess I'm interested, I guess, in two kind of bits of kind of practical guidance from you, I guess, on very different levels. One is kind of some of the work you do, what I saw you do at the WSA, and is, kind of, we should follow through on this because it was even mentioned in the event description, which is around kind of your readiness, readiness, your PRIME AI Readiness Assessment kind of process, and kind of to talk through a little bit, I guess, how people get ready and I guess think about AI strategically, like how it fits into their mission and how to get ready. And then I guess just some advice on prompting. You mentioned it before as one of the key reasons that kind of stops people getting value. And
Absolutely.
there's a lot of you get a lot of like, what seem sometimes a bit dubious courses on like prompting and so on. But I think probably all of us here today feel like that's something that we could all implement and play with right away with a bit of guidance. So maybe the high level and then the low level, but whatever
Yeah.
feels right to you. But yeah,
Yeah.
if you could just kind of lay out a few thoughts on those things before we
Yeah.
run out of time.
So the high level, I think, for any company, there are two key ways to use AI, or like there are, I have like this AI iceberg, because prompting comes at the top and it's meant for like simple task solving. Every time I got a task, I go to prompting and I solve my own task. And it's like, your chats with ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, Perplexity, Grok, whatever, you name it. But it's not automated. It's not kind of like a process, right? So it's kind of like a simple help, one task solution. That kind of going deeper to the iceberg, there is a layer of tiny processes that you can implement for yourself with Gemini Gems, which actually very recently became completely free for companies. And anybody who's interested, they can definitely Google it, and they can totally find a lot of different YouTube videos of how to create yourself a gem. It's a super easy process where you just insert instructions and you upload a lot of documents that are relevant for that task. For example, like all of your LinkedIn posts, and then prepare instructions for how do you want the style to be, what's your audience, like what's your business, and things like that. And then every time you have an idea, you just type in your idea, and Google Gem will have that context of how did you write, in the past, what's your style preferences, and it will produce actually like semi-final version of the post that you can tweak here and there. And it can be used for anything like proposal preparation, contract reading. It can be, like any kind of content preparation, analysis. So that's like a very powerful tool where it becomes a bit of more kind of like process, because instead of having to always prompt from the get-go how to respond to your customer inquiries, especially, for example, negative reviews, you can set up that mini AI assistant that will do the work for you every time you copy in that negative review, let's say. And that is a massive help. That's kind of like an employee thing that can, like make your day much faster. Also, ChatGPT has GPTs. Also, Copilot and Microsoft ecosystem has their own AI assistant. And then the kind of like going down to the company, to the kind of like the biggest chunk underwater of the AI iceberg is bigger process automations. And it starts with, first of all, deciding, do we want to use AI to automate the current processes, just to kind of like operational efficiency, to help us do things faster and things like that? Or do we want our main solution, how we provide the service, to become driven by AI? Again, Be My Eyes has now introduced an Be My AI feature where blind people can take pictures or videos and talk with AI that will be describing what it sees in front, which increased the blind participation by 40%, because people were reluctant to talk to strangers. Maybe my kitchen is a mess. Maybe I don't want to, I don't know what they will see, and I'm not feeling comfortable, inviting a stranger into my house, even though it's just a video. So Be My AI has like increased the participation drastically. And then those people who were comfortable using AI, they slowly started using the volunteers as well. So the whole participation has increased. Another example, Livox from Brazil. It started with a parent whose daughter got cerebral palsy at birth. And he made his life mission to create a solution that streamlines communication with his daughter. So Carlos, over years, has built this Android app, or I think iOS app as well, that, first of all, here's the question: are you in pain? And the slightest movement of Clara's eyes, his daughter's eyes, indicates it's a yes or no. Then immediately the AI knows that it was a yes or no question and related question, and pops up on the screen a lot of different body parts, so that Clara can then move the eyes and again immediately inform the father of which part of her body is not feeling right. So these two examples are using AI as fundamental way, like as our service, as our technology. This is the technology that actually delivers our intended serves the intended cause, serves the intended audience. versus we want to really just streamline and automate our current processes of how we issue invoices, of how we do proposals, of how we run our content, of our marketing. And that can be done with no-code tools. Make and NA10 are the two kind of most popular tools around the world, I guess, right now. Also, Microsoft has their own Power Automate. Also, Google has their own, ChatGPT, OpenAI has their own. But Make and NA10 are really geared for non-developers. The others start to kind of require some technical background and knowledge, whereas Make and NA10, anybody with YouTube and kind of like that education mindset can learn. And then there are also like a lot of templates that people can choose from, how to automate their sales, how to connect into their own CRM, how to connect it to their own emailing system, and really start to build not only like a small process and simple task automation where I, as a human being, still have to be involved every time. You know, it automatically, for example, starts reading our social media posts for negative reviews, and it automatically prepares a response. And then it automatically posts or sends a message to us to validate it and check it as a kind of like that, you know, human in the loop perspective. And both Make and NA10 have a huge library of these templates to solve many different kind of like operational inefficiencies and to automate them. So I think that the first step is obviously for any company to decide which path are we taking. Are we looking at AI as completely transformational service that we will be offering that will deliver our service? Or are we just looking at that, you know, like our efficiency, automation, and efficiency gains? And, you know, the three key ways is, as I mentioned, chatting to ChatGPTs or whatever AI tool you prefer, then looking at setting up GPTs or GEMs or like assistant for yourself to streamline those tasks and make them quicker, or go full on no code tools, Make or NA10, Zapier to really, but before you do that, you must understand your process super well. Because in companies, we usually get that situation where one process started, somebody did that, then somebody else came, they built on top. And, you know, there is so much clutter and so much incremental change. And that kind of like the first core process gets lost in the way. And we had too many, you know, noise, too much unnecessary steps. So the first step is to really, for any company, to define, to look at their processes and really draw these circles of like, this happened, this person is doing this, then this person is doing this, if yes, if no, if we need to do that, and like really draw out that process and then figure out what is, you know, not necessary in that process. How do we standardize that process? And once that paperwork or mirror work or whatever technology work you're using is done, then you can go and figure out how do you automate it. And on prompting, again, like, you know, in such a short amount of time, I would say go and watch YouTube. But what I teach always is the DNA of a prompt. Define a role. You have the ability to work with, you know, like somebody in their field, you would never, first of all, get their time or money to buy their resource. So an AI can impersonate that person, either an individual or a company or an industry. For example, for a lot of strategy work that I do, kind of preparing my course content and a lot of different things like strategies for ChangeAI, I say, imagine that you are a management consultant working with $100 businesses. And whatever you do, you can say, you know, like imagine you're Simon Sinek, imagine you're Seth Godin for marketing. Imagine like any person who has a lot of content online, you can ask AI to be that person and help you solve that task. So that's kind of like the first. The second one, and the order can be changed depending on the taste and things, is context. Why am I doing this? What is the reason? Details about my company, how, like, you know, what am I trying to achieve and things like that. So be super specific in the context side, like just add not clutter and like wishy-washy things, but very specific, concrete context. Who is the audience? What is my goal? What I would like to tell this management consultant to actually solve my problem about my company or about the problem that I'm solving. Then obviously give a task. What is it that we're trying to achieve? And then format is an option, like, like a list of files, or like, a document or a table or things like that. And that prompt in itself will, change the game for your prompting. But what I realized and what I started testing and what works really nicely for me on top of it is like, I come in first. For example, I'm preparing for a presentation at Clean Tech Days. I start by, tell me the history of electricity and how it impacted and evolved to the point that we have, electrical devices in our homes. Tell me the history of internet. How did it, get us to the point of like sending pigeons to kind of like send letters or telegraph, all the way to kind of Facebook and being so connected and Zoom calls and things like that. So I ask AI to zoom in on certain topics that I'm trying to do. Or for example, ChangeAI is doing this and that. This is the company. This is the audience that I want to serve. Can you analyze similar companies in Poland for me, in US, in Australia, in France, in Canada? So once it does that for me, I come in with my actual ask. Now the AI has zoomed in on that pockets of all the data that it has, and it brought it to their like awareness. So once I start asking now, help me to build a strategy, help me to build a marketing plan, I go step by step, detail by detail, and I always ask why this won't work. Give me an alternative opinion. What did we miss? What did you miss? How could you improve this output that you have produced? And that's how it works. Last night, I chatted to Gemini for 2 hours and I got amazing results. Like amazing results, but it took me 2 hours.
Yeah, that's interesting, I guess, because, the link to that challenge you were talking about with prompting is probably that impatience that you also mentioned earlier, that we kind of want, write me a business plan. And then I mean, definitionally, with imprecise instructions, you'll get a more generic version. It's obviously kind of giving you the best summary of kind of, the state of
Like
thinking, and to get beyond that, you need to kind of hone in more. I have realized this is entirely my fault. My apologies, people. I did promise the live guests a chance to ask questions. We're very short on time now. I've been reminded by people actually saying goodbye, because this can be a pretty hard stop for some people in their day. So my apologies, everyone. We probably have time for a couple of just quick questions. We'll kind of do rapid fire style. So if anyone wants to put one, I think in the chat at this point, please do. There's one earlier that I feel like you've covered, but maybe if you want to give a rapid fire extra response to that while we see if anything else comes through. It was Jelena was just saying that kind of she uses AI as a non-English speaker to play kind of editing and grammar checking roles. But often when talking to other people about AI, they kind of clam up, if I'm interpreting this right, out of skepticism. And so how can I approach or explain that AI does have some positive and kind of pros and cons, I guess you're saying, depending on how they use it, that's kind of what you've been talking about for the last 15 minutes. But I guess if you had to put that in a tweet, an old school tweet, 140 character tweet, how would you kind of summarize
an old
that?
school tweet.
Yeah, none of these essays.
Bluntly, I would invite those people to start learning AI. If you, what's the word that I'm looking in English? If you're criticizing somebody for using AI, it means that you're not learning yourself.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily the kind of like a simple answer, but really, it would be the same as like you're not using email, or you're not using a vacuum cleaner at home. You're kind of like always going there or like you're not going to a car wash. I'm sorry, stupid and short-sighted. Not stupid, but short-sighted. So I would really, really recommend those people to start using AI, because in that work, in whatever work we're doing, there's a lot of manual things that do not require mental capacity of a person. It doesn't add creativity. It doesn't add our, kind of like core of who we are, of our. So why not just use the technology as we've been doing across our homes and lives for our life to streamline that manual, that tedious element of work, really. And
Yeah, and
thanks.
I think
I
at a
will maybe
minimum,
turn it into a tweet.
at a minimum, I have to encourage people to treat it as a starting point. I mean, you're talking about kind of moving up to more sophisticated, 2 hours of effort, and you're getting outputs like like a very expensive strategy consultant. But I think as a starting point, I think about the kind of things you would like an intern to help you with, because AI is better than your average intern for almost anything. Like do a first draft of a grant application. Here's a couple of previous drafts. Exactly how you treat an intern, like a smart, competent intern. And kind of like the example, I think, even in the question, like editing, grammar checks, and so on, I think is a really good example. So
And
it
to
doesn't
be
look like we
honest,
have.
like deep research, while you're looking for questions, I
Yeah,
can
yeah.
really, like deep research, scholar, article research, all of the AIs, Perplexity has that, Gemini has that, ChatGPT has that. So it's sometimes impossible for a human being to actually be able to like process such huge volumes of information, right? So why not use that, especially in the research, as an intern who does that research for you? Go check
Yeah,
the sources.
summarizations.
Go
Yeah,
check
is
if
the
you
other.
actually agree with it. Summarizations, but be clever about your own time spent. Your brain capacity adds real value, really.
Yeah. A conference I was speaking at just like a month ago sent me. I got added somewhat late to the panel because I was in town for another conference. And they sent me the pre-readings like 36 hours before the event. And it was 200 pages of academic pages, academic stuff was pre-reading. I was like, summarize this. And it was still too long. I had to then summarize the summary. But like, I mean, I just physically couldn't have even begun to look through that in the time I had. And again, it's a type of translation, academic papers into more normal speak as well. So that kind of translation piece, I think, can be really interesting. Anyway, it looks like we haven't got any more burning questions, which is great because we've also got no more time. I'm going to take that as a sign that you are very clear that people are maybe already full in terms of good things to think about, things to try.
Yeah, and sorry for speaking too much. Really, sorry for speaking too much. I know that like I can go really wide, probably like spend an hour on every question that you had, Tom. So sorry about being
Oh yeah, of course,
too
you
much.
have a lot of knowledge. No, you did great.
But
Thank
we
you.
did start 5 past.
We did. I know that's on me. But and it's now 2 past. But I think fine. Just as a final thing, I mean, for people who want to kind of keep up, I guess, with you learning and sharing as you're going through this, what's the best places to connect with you and/or Change AI? Like, what are the best channels to keep track?
I would say my LinkedIn, where I dedicated to English speaking audience, and actually starting at the end of January, I will be doing. So right now, I'm running a pilot of SME owners and managers to educate them from improving their prompting all the way to ecosystem integration of like, if you're using Microsoft and it's Copilot, how do you make the most of it? All of that, and strategy for actually which processes to automate moving forward. So I'm piloting that in Lithuania right now, and plan to start an English cohort at the end of January, mid-January, end of January. So the best place is to sign up to newsletter on the website, or follow my LinkedIn, Odeta Iseviciute, as it's written here. Maybe we will also share somewhere a link, but yeah, that's the way.
We'll send both those links and to Odeta's various companies in the follow-up email. So thank you everyone for joining us this time. Thank you for those who watched it all the way through to this final moment subsequently.
Thank you very much.
May all your prompts be fruitful. Thank you so much, Odeta.
Exactly.
Speak to you again soon.
Thank you so much, Tom. Bye. Have a
Farewell,
nice
everyone.
day. Bye.
Cheers. Bye.
Farewell. Bye.